Welcome to the Stone Roadie Show. Here we are again, the Stone Roadie Show with Craig Reed, who's actually not on the Stone Roadie Show today. And we've got a special guest that we've been wanting to get on, Mark Frank, who a lot of people know who Mark Frank is. And if anybody's following Lynyrd Skynyrd, they would know that Mark Frank was a drum tech for Artimus Pyle. And he was on the plane that went down in Mississippi, October 20th, 1977. And we're real excited to have Mark here with us today. And we just want to make sure that that everybody knows that this conversation that we're having is sensitive to a lot of people, because there was some significant amount of loss of life on the plane, and Mark is aware of that, and he's even voiced his concerns about making sure that, he doesn't want to hurt anybody's feelings with anything he says. And I've talked with Mark in the past about things, and he is sensitive to that, and he's a gentleman. And so he wants to make sure that, that our conversation is just one of not details and specifics, but, just what happened. But first off, thanks for coming, Mark. We appreciate you being on the Stone Roadie Show. And some people are not just curious about what happened on the plane. They also want to know a little bit about Mark Frank. And how have you been doing since October 20th, 1977? What you been up to?
Just kind of living, oh, I don't know, it's been so long now, it's been pretty good with it. Time helps, but it doesn't heal. Matter of fact, though, with still the popularity of Skynyrd, it amazes me just how big the fan base is. And, it's until our crash is historical as far as rock and roll music, and the emergence of social media has brought us probably more scrutiny. Goes back to my stroke. We get a lot of recognition, put it that way, more so than I would have ever thought. The fan base gets bigger and bigger every day.
Yeah, it's one of those things. Some people, that follow Lynyrd Skynyrd, some people are very curious and inquisitive and very friendly and nice, and there's other people that can be downright mean. I've found in the past, some of these fan sites, people can get really ugly, But as far as your relation to Lynyrd Skynyrd, I know in speaking with you in the past, and you and I have known each other for like 3 or 4 years, and we first started discussing things. I believe we got in touch with each other because you knew that I was an aircraft mechanic at one time. I'm a licensed airframe and power plant mechanic, and you were asking me questions about the Wasp engine, that if I knew anything about it, and because you had seen some things on the plane that were kind of bothering you as far as some function of the engine. But well, let's go back first to Mark Frank, and I know you had some involvement with Marshall Tucker. Let's talk about that.
Spartanburg, South Carolina. All right. Artimus married my next door neighbor, Pat. All right. And I was after my wedding. So after we got married, after Artimus, he's a 4-year Marine, served on. They moved to Columbus, Ohio. Skynyrd and Tucker both put out their albums at the same time, the first album. And I know that Marshall Tucker played a concert in Columbus. Pat graduated high school with Toy Caldwell. So I'm pretty sure she called, got in touch with Toy, and Tucker invited him to the show. So I think that's sort of what sparked Artimus and Pat to move back to Spartanburg, because there were more things going on at that particular time. Spartanburg, Tucker was a good band. They're different from Skynyrd. But there's a lot of things going on. Mother's Finest, another band I like, was playing at a club that was Midnight Sun, Spartanburg. Hank Williams was coming down doing some things. I was Tucker at one time, not too long after that, on the Opera House. So music-wise, Spartanburg was pretty good. You know, I mean, we had David Ball, country singer, he's from here. Buck Trent, he's from Spartanburg. Hank Garden, him and Billy Bird, ones that designed the Birdland guitar. So, you know, but that's what got him back. Now, I'll give Artimus this. When he came back to Spartanburg, when they relocated, he didn't sit on his ass waiting for somebody to knock on the door. He went out looking for a gig. You know, I mean, he worked to find a job. And I think I'm pretty sure that once he moved back here, he saw Paul Riddle. He'd already met him. He followed Paul, you know, back, you know, to his house and reintroduced himself. And that's sort of what got everything going. It was Tucker got Artimus the connection to audition for Charlie Daniels at the warehouse there in New Orleans. And but anyway, I think I probably might have lost some of what you asked. You know, this goes back to stroke. You know, I still have to search for work.
Yeah. So then I guess basically your connections from Artimus were through Marshall Tucker somewhat, and then eventually, you know, you and Artimus, you became his drum tech. And how long were you working with Skynyrd before the plane incident happened?
About a year.
About a year. So you did quite a bit of touring then.
Just some, yeah. But they were recording a lot. Did a lot, you know, we'll go out for maybe 3 weeks, 4 weeks. I did on the British Road tour and did that. When I'm talking, some kind of things will pop in my mind that
right. Same thing with Greg. Go. Yeah.
Well, the thing about Skynyrd, yeah, I was fairly new to it. But I got to admit, after, you know, with Steve, and back up, Ed King contributed a lot to the success of Skynyrd's early years. You cannot take that away from him. When he left, I'm sure he left with his own health and good reason. Okay, but Steve, when they hired him, they had no idea just what they were getting to someone that was that gifted,
right?
That brought everything. And the point I'm getting ready to make is even I could tell once Street Survivors came out that Skynyrd was going to go, had the opportunity to go probably to uncharted waters. And actually, the album Street Survivors hit #5. If it hadn't been for Fleetwood Mac Rumors album that said just kept on that #1 spot, I'll say that Street Survivors probably would have hit #1 for at least 1 week, maybe 2. That's not a put down. It's only 52 weeks a year. So if you get an album that hit #1, you've made a big accomplishment. But that album, I could tell, like you could just feel that their success was going to shoot like a rocket. And Skynyrd was smart enough. I know Gary and Alan were tired of covering 3 guitars with just 2 guitars, you know. And oh hell, this goes like, like I said, I just forgot what I was wanting to say. But there was I know it. That Skynyrd, they were ready for something. They could tell it, but they were smart enough to give Steve whatever range he wanted. Just you do it. You know, there was no restriction. And Steve and Ronnie, you know, this doesn't always happen. You have 2 good songwriters sometimes there can be a little conflict, because this person get their song up or whatever. But Steve and Ronnie liked each other. They got along good. And I'll give you one biggest reason why. For Ronnie Van Zant to leave the front of the stage and turn it over to Steve Gaines pretty well tells you what he thought of Steve. Yeah, he deserved it. He wanted it, and it was something he did naturally. So that would be that was rare,
Right.
And Steve was as gifted as any musician that was out there in this time. And oh no, go ahead. Another question.
Well, okay. So I get on this Zoom meeting, I get these notifications about time running out and stuff, and I've got like a 10-minute warning. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk a little bit about, in about the next 5 minutes, about you getting on the plane and when you first started noticing issues. I hate to move it along, but once we in this meeting, I'll either edit the 2 meetings together or we'll have a part 2.
I can go into this pretty quick, I think.
Yeah. When did you start noticing things on the plane going wrong?
Well, really, when we left Lakeland that night, we had tail fire. And I talked to a lot of pilots, that was first indication. And I think our tail fire, exhaust fire, was because they did not build up enough compression in the right engine.
Right.
That had been changed. So the flight from Lakeland to Greenville probably had more anxiety in it than anything else. I mean, that was uncomfortable. So once we landed in Greenville for 4 o'clock in the morning, let's say on the 19th. Okay, everybody left them. Woke up next morning, did the show, concert, everything went good. And then it rolled down to the 20th. We were concerned about it then, but some time had passed a little bit and things were getting back normal. It was just eerie. And now when you really look back, Lynyrd Skynyrd and Rick Nelson both had crashes. You don't tour on vintage aircraft. It
Right.
was just, it's a shame, really. It just, and the reason why probably a lot of us, continued with it. Have you ever had a job that they asked you to do something that you felt a little uncomfortable about doing, but you needed to do it? One, because you got a family, you need money, so you did it anyway. Now, don't get me wrong, if I knew the plane was going to crash, I think I would have backed out of it. But, the flight up until the point that we had, started losing fuel real fast was pretty good. It was just didn't quite make it.
Yeah. And just like Craig says, the plane was okay until you don't have any fuel in it. But then again, the engine wasn't operating right, and then it was starving for fuel. So
yeah, now I have my hypothesis on that. I think I mentioned before, down the road. Well, anyway, the pilot I was talking to, Mr. James Cotton, explained to me too that sometimes when you're in dire needs, Mother Earth does not give you any good option putting the plane down. And far as people, well, will say, I wouldn't have done this, I would have done that. Bull. The reason why you can't put a plane down, our plane on the road, is from wing tips, is 91 feet.
it wouldn't fit, right?
No way. And those roads are so small. You would have a pilot would have to be a great pilot, even in a 2-seater with low wings, putting the plane down, which is called a dead stick landing with no power on those roads. They're not even, they're not straight enough, they're not long enough, They take what Mother Earth gives you.
Gotcha. Well, Mark, we're going to go ahead and we're going to bring this meeting to a close. But what we're going to do is we're going to call this part one. And either I'll combine part one with part two, and if it takes part three, we'll either do it all in one podcast, or we'll come back and we'll let the folks see this podcast, and then in a few days we'll see another one. So we're just.
And I will get more comfortable as this goes on.
Yeah, and I know it is hard to talk about. But we'll come back, and and we'll be doing part two. So everybody stick with us, and there's going to be a part two on this. Mark's got a lot of great information. We're going to still talk about what was happening on the plane when he started seeing things go wrong. And then we're going to talk about what happened when the plane started going down. And we're going to talk about the fact that Mark walked away from this thing, and he is actually one of the few people that did walk away from it and go get help. And that's what's really awesome, that he did that. And then later on, after almost like 40 years, he actually got back together with the people that were the first responders to the plane crash. And now there's a whole lot of things going on because of that. We've got the monument. And so we're going to talk about all those things. Mark, thanks for being on with us. And either we'll continue this in one podcast or it'll be in another. So stay tuned. There's a lot more to come. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you.
Okay, we're back on the Stoned Roadie show, and this is going to be part two, our visit with Mark Frank. He's a drum tech for Artimus Pyle Lynyrd Skynyrd back in the 70s, and was on the plane that went down in Gillsburg, Mississippi. And we're just going to pick up right where we left off with part one. We don't know how many parts there's going to be to this particular podcast, or exactly how I'm going to edit them together or not, but we're going to call this part two. Thanks for joining us again, Mark. And so where we left off at, we were talking about the plane. It was kind of acting like it was starving for fuel, and there were some things that were concerning you about the way it was, the plane was running. When you were in your seat, I guess this all kind of started more in Lakeland, didn't it?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think what happened in Lakeland eventually ended up bringing us down in Gillsburg. And I got to admit too, if we were going to crash, Gillsburg was absolutely the best place. It was small. They did an excellent job, and on that night, regardless, there were tons of people down there. Anybody that was involved with it, on that night, everybody did their absolute best. Whether they were holding the rope, keeping people back, some people tried to help, but regardless, everybody that night did their best.
Yeah, I think actually the Coast Guard had been training at that particular time, and they were doing some maneuvers, and it just coincidentally at the same time that the plane went down, that they were all tuned up with their skills, and that helped quite a bit from what I remember. So, I remember a few years ago, you and I were talking about that Wasp engine, and you had seen like a streak of fuel that ignited going out of an engine or something.
Yeah. Okay. That goes back. Over the years, we've heard all kind of stuff. The Convair 240, the one we had, serial number 3, had one fuel tank, right? 2 electric fuel pumps. So Flame was not capable of dumping fuel. There's only so many ways a plane's gonna run out of gas. To me, it makes as much sense, you know. Why would it be out of the ordinary, or why? What's the big deal? To me, it makes as much sense if fuel line came loose. Because one of my most vivid memories, we were flying, Steve Lauder was to my right. I was looking, flying, looking toward the front of the plane. At the same time, the right propeller just started going around, and I could see fuel being pumped out, and the arc, it had pressure on it. So by that gave us 8 minutes for that plane to pump out whatever fuel we had. I mean, all this other stuff does not make sense. Pilot's going to dump it, or mistaken to do that. Well, they were moderately trained. They had enough hours. Were the Chuck Yeager? No. By the same token, they stayed strapped in their plane in the seats. They brought the plane in the best they could do. And I'm convinced that, we went down because we lost fuel from a fuel line coming loose. To me, that makes as much sense as anything in the world.
Yeah, a lot of people, I guess, there's the theory that fuel was dumped. There's a theory that they were running rich. And then this is probably the first time anybody's heard this theory, which, you were an eyewitness. So, let's think about that. I mean, I know that they did an investigation, but who knows?
Well, in 77, they're probably at level 1. Now in 2022, I mean, the NTSB and FAA, I mean, the forensics, let's call it, are as good as anybody else.
Right.
Back then. So, but to me, just using common sense, to me, that's what makes sense.
Yeah, because you did say you saw that fuel coming out of an arc, and so that's been bothering you all these years. I know, because we talked about it. Let's talk about where you were on the plane. So people, were you by the window, or where were you seated at on there?
At the very end of it, at the tail section, it was a double seat. I was on the right side. Me, Steve Lauder, straight across from me was Craig Reed, and then to my diagonal over there was Mark Howard. But now Craig Reed, I got to admit, he's probably the only person that does not remember getting on the plane, or getting off of it. And tell you, once we had problems, I looked right across Craig, and he just kind of shrugged his shoulders, like, don't look at me, I'm not flying the damn thing. And but I knew it was bad then, just from the way the pilots had turned the plane. They did the 180, and it was almost like a 60, 70 degree angle. And that maneuver actually has a name to it. I don't know if they matched it up completely, but they developed that when the nose gauge dropped, little boy. They had to be so far away. I think it had to be 5 miles away by the time the bomb hit. Yeah, but you could just tell, just from moving a plane, how quick it happened. It was a emergency, and they were trying to get back to the airport just as fast as they could.
So did anybody tell you that that's what they were trying to do, or is that?
Didn't have to. I mean, like I said, I knew it was bad then. And going up to, this is no clear memory. One, you will be surprised just how quick you accept your fate. Yeah, it was that quick. And then I distinctly remember one. So this is how it's going to end for me. I was convinced that was my last day. But I mean, I do have a little bit of, I think, an emergency. My sister wants me to come up, something about my brother and his arm.
Okay.
I'm gonna have to cut this quick.
Okay.
And until
well, I tell you what we'll do. We'll go ahead and we'll talk about on the next one. We'll pick up right where we left off. So we'll just call this this podcast part 1 and 2, and then we'll get back with the rest of the story.
All right, good enough. Appreciate it.
All right. Thanks for being with us, Mark.
All right.